Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Marek and I have a huge pleasure to be with you today on the next episode of Netguru Disruption Talks. Netguru Disruption Talks is a place where we invite top experts to discuss digital acceleration, to discuss winning strategies, to discuss innovation and scaling projects and products. And today we have a very special guest with us, Thomas Holl, co-founder at Babbel. Hi, Thomas.
Hi, great to meet you. Looking forward to having a conversation with you.
Absolutely. And I've met Thomas a couple of times recently, and we've been discussing Babbel, how Babbel is doing in these interesting times we are in. But before we jump straight into that, Thomas, if you could introduce Babbel and yourself to our audience, that would be great.
Yeah. Sure. So my name is Thomas. I'm one of the co-founders of Babbel, and I had many different roles. So from leading the product and engineering teams in the first time to scaling up the US and setting up our US office to introducing new products. And for those of you who don't know Babbel, Babbel is the top number one most selling language app worldwide. And we're teaching French, Italian, Spanish, English to everybody. And what started out as a regular interactive app is now really an ecosystem of multiple learning methods. So that starts from the classical lessons that we had on the platform first place, review systems, but we've added live and group classes as well. And we're bringing really like a very wide range of different learning methods to our users. And we're quite successful with that.
Yes, and as we talked last time in Berlin, I can confirm that my wife is still making great progress with Italian, so it's well working. So to anyone who hasn't tried, I highly recommend it. And maybe to also give an idea of the scale and scope of Babbel, how big are you? How have you been growing over the last years?
Yeah. So as I said, we're the most sold online language learning platform globally. So in 2020, we had over 10 million of subscriptions sold by then. And in 21, we had a cash revenue of 200 million revenues. So this boils down to a team of about 1,000 people that are working mostly in Berlin, but increasingly in the US, in New York as well. Just to give you some perspective on the company.
Right, definitely helps. And for me, the idea for our talk actually came from our last meeting. And we had first a call, I think in November, then we met last month. And as I was telling you, I was doing like this roadshow, meeting a lot of entrepreneurs, trying to figure out how the entrepreneurs, how the industries think the business today, the future. And the discussions with you were really nice because you said that I know that the situation is difficult, but it's great for us. So it inspired me to invite you today, and so you can share how you are doing this. So despite that the market is difficult, that the VC funding is scarce, and that we are all living in a very uncertain times, how is it possible, and how do you do it at Babbel that you keep on growing in this situation?
Yeah. Very interesting question, and I think it's pretty clear that the pandemic, this was like a really major boost to all of the online learning, self-improvement, education solutions. So for language learners, the weird thing is, or maybe not so weird, I think there's some very good reasons for that, is that this trend that was accelerated during COVID actually goes beyond COVID. So after the lockdowns ended, our growth hasn't stalled down, like we're still growing quite heavily. And I think this is due to a couple of factors that I'm pretty sure we'll go a bit deeper into. But just maybe going back to the pandemic, I think that was a really catalyst moment for a lot of companies. And the way it played out for us and for language learning, I think in general, was very much because we're pretty international, we could see the effect of lockdowns in the different countries because they were coming at certain times, obviously throughout the pandemic. And what we could pretty much see, I think Italy very much was the first country that went into lockdown, at least in Europe. And what we could see in Italy, for example, was the first week after lockdowns, our traffic completely broke down. And the rationale for that, or my explanation is, a lot of people obviously had to make sure they would cover their most basic needs, kind of like, how do I take care of the kids? What is that situation going to? How is it going to affect my income? How I'm organizing my family? All of these things. But what we could see after that week pretty fast was that the ask for learning languages would go up massively. So even in those countries where we've been quite active for over 16 years now, we've seen that actually the activity and new people coming into the platform doubled or tripled year over year. And that was already on a very high ground. So you could see 1 week pause, nothing really happened. After that week, really the interest shoot up. And I think that's one of the pieces that COVID and the lockdowns really accelerated in learning, I think in general, was people noticed you can learn something online. You can learn with these new digital tools. I mean, we're around since 2007, so it's not that new. But it really seemed that COVID was a big catalyst in bringing a lot of people to these new technologies that have been too skeptical before, but COVID forced them to try out, or there was nothing else to do basically. So you would flee to those areas. And I think that is one of the reasons why the trend for us after it was really positive as well. So lockdowns ended. We were not too sure what exactly would be happening. I think no one really was. No one really had like the crystal ball in that regard. And for us, really, we've seen the trend of moving from offline. Language learning is still a very much offline-based where you go to a class. That was broken up during COVID. And we're still seeing that longer term trend play out really favorably for us.
Yeah, and if we could break it down, so there was this first huge uncertainty around COVID. How did you react as the management team? Did you start making changes very quickly, or you decided to wait? Because what I'm trying to do for our audience is to explain your way. Your way was successful. Explain your way, maybe it will act as an inspiration.
Yeah. I think the first phase for us company-wide was more internal, as in making sure all employees, all people working for Babbel or in the wider ecosystem, that we would have that covered. So like, we're a digital company since the very founding moment. So transitioning to an working from home environment wasn't super complicated for us. Everything was already set up in the cloud anyway. But just to make sure people would be settling in, and that we had like programs available for parents who now would have to take care of their kids or elderly ones. And so that very much was the first step, kind of like orient ourselves and help our employees become productive in that new situation. And then we looked quite heavily into the different markets. So being like an international company, that was very helpful as well. Because Italy, as I told, was like the first piece where we had actually some hypothesis on how that could be playing out. But we could see it in real time as it happened. And so I think for that was a very data-driven way then for us as well, to figure out, okay, we can analyze what happened in Italy, so we can probably project out very likely what is going to be happening in those other countries as well. So we used the early signals that we were getting from those early markets in applying kind of like the demand and the needs on all of the other markets. I think that was a very big driver for us, really taking advantage of the situation as well, and like not scaling down as in terms of like team size, not scaling down our activities. And I think the other piece that was really helpful as well is we helped to reach out to a lot of affected people. So we had a campaign in Italy where we would basically hand out free Babbel licenses to all universities and to all students who couldn't go to university anymore. And that's something that we replicated in a lot of other countries as well. And I think that's part of the core mission of the company as well, to really be helping in the areas that we can, which is providing language learning.
Absolutely. So I would then just trying to recap it a bit, helping the team, helping the wider ecosystem in the new circumstances. But it also seems that your approach is very data-driven. So you're quickly analyzing the data and then taking some bets about the future and then trying to move in that direction. Would you say that you were taking very brave bets or maybe like safer bets? How would you rate your response in 2020 to the market?
So I would say we do actually both, and I'm just smiling a bit because that's one of the Babbel internal values that we have: be humble and be bold. So like two values in like one sentence, or like one of the values contains these both, bold and humbleness. And I think that's what is very much in our DNA as well. So the humbleness, I think, is part of that. We've run the business very sustainable. So we never had like really crazy periods where we would spend a ton of money ahead of the revenue growth or ahead of growth. So all of that was already aligned quite heavily, which is a really good basis in those moments of crisis, because then you can react much faster, or you're much more down to earth in terms of anticipating and reacting to a changing landscape as well. I think that's what's playing out right now as well, especially after the lockdowns ended, where we've seen a lot of tech stocks crash. Tech industry, I think, is partly not in a really good shape. And we weren't really like part of that group as well, because we've been like really humble in the way we run the business. The other part is the boldness, I think. And in that time, we took quite some bold decisions, not to ramp down, not to decrease our team size, not to decrease the type of efforts we would do on the outreach, but rather double down. So I think in the March 2020, we really doubled down based on our beliefs, what we would invest in marketing, what we would invest in the product, and what we would invest in all other areas. And this time it played out really nicely for us.
Perfect. And I think we can then fast forward to last year, this year, because there were many companies that benefited from the market shifting during COVID, like Zoom, for example. But most of the companies right now are suffering, and you are not. And I think like this is even more interesting because it's very recent. Have you changed something, or how did you position yourself in a way that when the market is shifting right now, you are not being impacted negatively?
For us, and I think language learning in general, I think in these moments of when there is like a recession looming, when customer spend might be shifting as well. So certainly we've seen people not spending 500, 800 euros on like new furniture anymore. But for us, really, in those moments of crisis, we've seen that a bit in the early stages of 2008, 2009 as well. People are still looking forward to invest, especially in those uncertain times. So I think education in general is something that is still high on people's agenda. That's where people really reach out. Obviously, what we've seen as well is some hesitation in terms of like how much to spend in general. But what really helped us as well was moments when we just increased our marketing, when we increased the way we approached our product. And the other part, I think that we laid the groundwork in 2020 already, is introducing new products. For example, Babbel Live is one of those products that we introduced and released, I think, in 21, after a year of working on that. And so to really bridge the gaps between like a purely digital like self-study app and, for example, the human side of that. And that's what we're still experiencing today. I think people are looking for these experiences that takes them beyond like a digital only fashion. And for us, that takes the form of online learning together in a group. So it's still online in like a Zoom-based environment. But the other side is you connect to people. And I think that's something that took us quite far.
Yeah, perfect. And if I imagine like what can be the future for Babbel, you can either add a lot of languages, so expand in the scope. You can also deepen the relationship with your clients by adding them new ways of interacting, new services like Babbel Live.
Yeah,
you can do both. But what's your strategy for the next 3 years, as much as you can share with us?
So we decided, I think early on, and just reconfirmed that multiple times in the company's history, that we are a language learning company. So we really want to help people learn a language, and we really want to create mutual understanding. And that's the wider frame that we're taking. And so for us, that is basically based on the insight that no one who learned a language did that with one method. So there is no one who learned a language just with a book, or just with a teacher, or just with anything else. So real successful language learners usually combine those methods. So you might be watching a Netflix movie in like your target language that you're learning, or you might add a teacher to the side. You might use an app, and you might look at a YouTube video. So all of these combinations. And what's really our path forward, and I think we've shown the first signs of that in the product as well, as to be the company that actually integrates those methods, where you can seamlessly switch from a digital review system where you spend 20 minutes just reviewing vocabulary, because hey, it's still learning, right? And we try to make it as fun as humanly possible and as easy, but it's still learning. And so to combine something like that with a live group class, so use the app to prepare for that, then go into the class, talk to people, figure out how much you actually can already speak, and then maybe go back to watch a YouTube video, or to watch something on the platform, listen to a podcast. So to combine all of that and build a real seamless user journey on how do we bring you the right journey that is really there for you and that is like personalized to you. That's the biggest mission that we're currently on, and that will probably still take us a couple of years. So quite a big and exciting mission, I think.
Absolutely true. And we have some first questions from the audience. I will try to bring them in as well throughout our discussion. Right now, question from Philip. Thomas, I see rising presence of automatic translation in browsers, apps that convert speech to text, translate the text, speak the translated text out loud, even in real time. Is there a moment in which human brain doesn't need to learn a language because the tech infrastructure was simply relieving from that task? What happens then? Will the people be incentivized to learn languages? What's your point of view?
Yeah, I think that is very much true. And I think the progress that we've seen in machine learning and machine translation over the last couple of years has just been phenomenal. So there's quite a lot of companies out there that provide that really well. And I think what we're going to see in that area as well is that a lot of the transactional use cases can be taken over by machine translation in whatever form. So if you're just going to Spain for one day to have like a business meeting, I think you're totally fine just using Google Translate, whatever, to actually talk to a cab driver to get you there. I think what will never really go away is the element of language where you use it to connect to people, where you want to build up a deeper relationship, where you want to understand the culture, where you want to immerse yourself in the culture. And I think that is an element that will be there, and that's one of the main reasons for people to learn a language in the first place. So when I just look at our data and the reasons for our users to learn languages, for example, in the US, there is a big motivation that people want to connect with their heritage. So maybe your granddad came over from Cologne to the US, and now you're living there. You don't speak German anymore, but you still have like somehow these ties that you feel are important for your identity, and that's one of the big drivers to learn German in that case. I think that part, sure, you can use machine translation and you can use these apps, but I think the identity part will not be covered by that very much. And so the short answer is yes, some parts of that, the transactional part, will be taken over. There is no reason to learn these 5 sentences. but there is a bigger human need, I think, involved in terms of being able to connect to other people. And that shows a lot of respect. I think a lot of people in Spain really appreciate it, like on an emotional level, if you take the effort to be able to talk to them in their own native language. And I think that is something that I believe will always be there, because it's part of our nature.
And I think it's also different use cases, right? So people using Babbel, usually not the people that want to just learn the 5 sentences and that's it, because they will go for a day and to Berlin. Yep. And those are the people that really want to try grasping the entire language, immersing the culture, as you said. I think different use cases. And going a bit back to the market and how you deal with different types of situations. When we chatted in Berlin, you also mentioned that there was a time when you didn't grow. There was a time when your business was struggling. If you could tell us a bit more about that, but especially, how did you react to it? Like how did it impact you as an executive team? How did it impact you as a leader? Because this is a situation in which many of the entrepreneurs are right now, and seeing how you got out of it, and some of them are right now in the situation for the first time. So seeing how you got out of it could be very, very useful to them.
Yeah. And I can go back to maybe one of the first experiences we had at Babbel. So we started out in 2007, released the first version in 2008, had some really good initial traction. But the years between 2008 and 2010 were really hard for us. We're like a small company, I think 12 people overall. So really like on the brink of, it's too interesting to just stop and say like, this is not going to work. But it's not enough growth and it's not enough progress to really say like, okay, yes, we're totally crushing it. So we're like really stuck in that middle time. And I think one of the reasons that got us there in the first place, I think we have been very product and tech oriented founders. So that was our theme, kind of like every problem that we've encountered was a product problem. We tried to solve it with building new features, building like new mechanisms. And we did some really, really amazing things back in 2009. Just an example, we built the first speech recognition that would run in a browser, which was like a cross-compiled C++ element compiled into Flash bytecode. So really advanced stuff that we did back then. But it didn't move the needle. People were excited about that, but we weren't able to growth. And I think that kind of like we tried a couple of different things. And probably the biggest advice is don't give up. Try 100 different things. And if those things don't work, then you might have a bias. Then you might have, like I told our bias, I think, was very much like we solving that from a product only perspective or a tech only perspective. Then you might need to look into other areas, whether that's like, how do you actually acquire customers? How do they find out? Like, what's the marketing story that you're telling? Maybe there is something about the pricing. Maybe there's something about all these other elements. And I think the lesson for us, which is now in our values as well, I think based on that time, is that diversity, and especially the diversity of like how you think and the experiences that you bring to the table can really make a huge difference, because sometimes you're so much deeply focused on one area that you're going into like tunnel vision. And I think that's really the opportunity such a time right now can bring as well. It's kind of like, okay, maybe it's time to step out of that tunnel vision that you might have and just consider like a broader environment. Maybe there is something to do on a completely different dimension that you even haven't looked into, because you were so focused on what you've been doing so far.
Mm-hmm. And there's a question, I think you might have answered it already, from Rafał. What's the number one advice you can give to other founders? Would it be don't give up or something else?
I think that is definitely one of the things. And the other piece is don't give up. Just try until it works. I think that's the other part. And be curious enough, I think, and be open enough to figure out and to learn what you don't know. I think that's the unknown unknowns.
Yeah. And back to the story you told us. So there was those 2 years. It was difficult. Your lesson was not to give up. What was the outcome? The outcome was that you didn't give up. You did the same thing and it started working, or the other way around, that you saw the bias and you saw other things that you need to improve first.
Yeah. I think that in that case, it really was, we tried something new. We tried something that we didn't, that wasn't in our nature very much. So we tried online marketing ourselves. So even though we've been mostly focused on tech in our career so far, it was like, okay, we need to figure out maybe online marketing really is a way to grow. So we sat down in a completely alien environment and tried to figure that part out, because even though we've been using agencies at that time and like trying to bring in these experts, I really think the lesson here to learn for us was you need to have like the core competencies in-house as well. There is no one as vested in your success as you, as the founding team, or as the company or employees that work for you or that work on the mission. And if you try to externalize that and put too much that thing outside and tries like, hey, there is experts that can do that. Yes, they might be experts. They might have like much more functional knowledge than you, but they will never be as vested in the topic, in the mission of the company to make it work. And I think that's your biggest strength as a founder, to really have like that dedication to make it work. And so I always believe that the will to succeed and the will and the drive to actually do it is in many cases much more important than the functional expertise, than like the knowledge level.
Will over skills. That makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
And another piece of our discussion from Berlin that I found really interesting is about your role today. So if someone looks you up on LinkedIn, they see Thomas, co-founder. And when we chatted, it turned out that you are still actually operational in the company, but you are not on the top executive team right now. You are not in the management board. And as I talk to many entrepreneurs, it's very uncommon that it works. So if you could share with us, like, what's your role about, like what areas in the business you are covering, but also then how you and the management team made it work that you can actually be an owner, co-founder in the team, but not the CEO or COO.
Yeah, that is not sure if it's unusual, but so I'm part of the executive team of Babbel. So I still play that role of like a managing director, taking care of a lot of the things that come from the exec role. But throughout my career at Babbel and the founding, I always took up many different roles. So in the beginning, I was working very much on the product, on the tech, and building up the first couple of versions of Babbel and myself with obviously all the engineers and product folks that we hired. But then there was a time when we had to figure out how to actually do content. So how does the content come into the platform? And so I took that on as well. So I was like our first content lead, as such to say, and try to build up that build up that organization. Then I was CTO for another couple of years. Then I spent 2 years in the US building up our US office, and that was from 2014 to 2016, really leveraging my experience in the market, understanding consumers really well, understanding the tech side and product side really well, and then applying that to the US environment. So luckily that worked out quite well. So yes, now is our biggest market and the market that is growing the fastest for us as well. So I was jumping between many different roles. And I think for me personally, that's one of the things where I have like a very broad skill set nowadays. Was CTO then back again for a couple of years, but was chief strategy officer. So you get the point. I think that was the long version of my CV. I think what works really well is having like the understanding of how the company works in order to move things ahead in a really good way as well, because I understand the history, I understand the values, I understand very much, or can keep up the vision on what we're trying to build in terms of where we want to go. And I think that brings in a lot of ego-free approach as well. So it is I don't have like a particularly interest for myself as like, what do I need, like what type of like empires do I need to build? That is not the point. I'll be successful when the company is successful. And I think that type of attitude and that type of background, being like the founder and a big shareholder in the company, I think really can take out that ego part. And I think that helps a lot of people just saying like, oh yeah, let's maybe do these things, not just because like it's working out somewhere on the org chart, but it's in the best interest of the company and the learners that we're trying to serve.
Yeah, I mean, you said that you don't know how unusual it is. It's very unusual, and very few companies I know where. So usually, when you professionalize the executive team, it's usually the time where the founders are thinking about the new adventures. So congratulations for making it work. But I think in your answer, in your like this long CV, as you said, there's a lot of the answer why it works, because you have had a lot of roles, and as you said, it's not the most important. The role is not the most important for you, but the value you bring. And it's and as much as you would like this to be true for everyone, I'm not sure it is. So I think this is why the setup works. And maybe one final question about this, because there can also be a challenge, and I don't know if it happened for you, for the team, when there's the new CEO and when there's you as the co-founder, and you say things which are different, who to listen to? How did you figure this out?
I think that is. I think that's happening basically on most of the management teams. I think like even if you're super aligned, you have like different ways of expressing what you're aligned on and where you want to take the company. I think that is not necessarily like a specific task in there. I think what works really well for us is Arne, who is now CEO, joined the company quite a long time ago and was chief marketing officer for quite some time. And I think as that, like during that time of like working together for over, I think 5-6 years now, is that you build these bonds and like take a shared vision. And I think from my perspective, that's one of the greatest things like to see at Babbel, is the type of team that you are able to build, or the type of people that you're able to attract. And I think that is true for the exec team, but that is true for all of the teams and for many people that we're now so much more professional and so much more dedicated and capable than we were 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 3 years ago. And just seeing the amount of talent joining is super exciting, because it really allows us to take on bigger projects, bigger things, and do more for our customers.
Yeah, so I think I would, like, if I was to abbreviate the answer, it would be that the culture is the answer. So it's you don't have these confusions because you have the right culture to be able to say out loud any kind of statement, and then figure out what's the truth, right? And then move forward.
Absolutely.
Some more questions from the audience. A question from Zosia. Is there anything you had to unlearn in your career path?
Totally. Just don't know exactly where to start with that question. I think the biggest one, and it's super amusing looking back, is when we started out, we were all coming from a music software background, and so we had like a really capable teams, and like, okay, we're tackling that music software project. And then at that moment, some of my co-founders wanted to learn Spanish, and we said like, hey, there is nothing that you can learn Spanish with online. We said like, hey, come on, it's 2007. Of course, there is a website for that. Turns out there wasn't something, and so our approach was like, yeah, we have like product tech expertise, so how hard can it be? Kind of like we can totally do that. Kind of like the young naive thing, and like, okay, what do we need? Probably like a couple of people who can build something, who can design something, release it out in the open, and yeah, that will be it. So tech will solve everything. And I think that is something that I had to unlearn in a quite a harsh way as well. And I told the episode around like early stage growth and sometimes not being there where we wanted it to be. And I think a big part of like overcoming and unlearning was exactly that. So I'm super proud of the real diverse team that we built up. Teaching experts, for example, is one of the elements that we added quite early then as well. But marketing, product, engineering. So we had to build up all these functions and all of these different expertises and really figure out a way of making them work well together, because there is a huge difference between like a software engineer and a brand marketeer, just the type of personalities these roles usually attract. And to really, I think our success and the part that I had to unlearn was like that you can solve everything just with the hammer. I think you need different tools. And I really believe a diverse team is the best way to approach that, because then you have that like in your core team.
Right. Thank you for sharing this one. But judging by your reaction when you heard the question, I think we could have talked an hour about unlearning, right?
Totally.
And another question actually a bit connected. So you mentioned that the difference between the different teams. And the question from Paulina is, what is special about the engineering culture at Babbel? If you see something very special, are there any team rituals that you like the most?
Yeah. So one of the things I personally, this is like now my perspective, which is probably different to many other ones, is I enjoy a lot the rituals that we have around sharing. So we have quite different formats at Babbel when it comes to engineering. I think one of them, for example, is the hack and tell format. And this is one format that we run internally, which is not recorded. Like there is some real pressure to actually show up, or you might miss like the presentation and the telling of a lifetime. And that is open to anyone who did something interesting. And one of the rules is you can't just show like slides or things, but you have to show code. You have to like really explain what you did over there. And it can be from Babbel internal projects. So we built like speech recognitions in a really great way. So there's some great things coming on that side. And that could be one of the things, or it could be something from a side project. So you never really know what's going to happen over there. And it really shows the type of people we attract and the qualities they bring. That is one of the examples. There is obviously other pieces around what I read, where I'm quite dedicated to is reading the newsletter that comes out, like the internal kind of like what happened in the last weeks, because this is really amazing to see. After you scaled up, I think we've got more than 15 teams working on different things. And so it's hard sometimes to really keep track on what exactly is happening. And that's one central place where you can just like, wow, 2 weeks, that much happened. That's really exciting to see as well.
And taking maybe one more question from the audience. So you mentioned at some point today that US became your biggest market. And the question from Justina is, what's the main difference between the US and European users, customers at Babbel? Do you customize your product to target them a bit differently, or it's the same product for the global market?
Yeah. One of the biggest difference is obviously in the languages that are being learned. So roughly you can say English-speaking countries don't learn English so much, whereas in the non-English speaking markets, English is the major driver. That's what people want to learn. So US very much has a focus on Spanish. And one of the ways, and I think that's the difference in the way we customize as well, is they're interested in Spanish for Latin American, which has like slightly different pronunciation. Every country within Latin America has like slightly different words, jargon, etc. And one of the ways we obviously customize it is, so we've got the European Spanish for European learners, where like Mexican Spanish, for example, wouldn't be one of their main targets, and Americans learning really the Mexican Spanish on our platform. I think that's one of the really basic elements. The other one is why are people learning a language in the first place? And that is one of the real big differences as well. I mentioned that as well, the connecting back to my heritage. So like my ancestors might have been coming from Italy. So that's a way I want to connect back to that. And I think there is some really interesting user stories around like that need as well. That type of need doesn't really show up in European countries. So this is something that we had to learn in the US, that this is like a big driver. And obviously the way we're personalizing that or attaching that is like the personal relationships in there, like talking to family, etc., becomes a much bigger theme when we talk about content. So which lessons do we prepare, or Mexican Spanish travel specific content. So that's the way we're addressing the differences on the product side.
Right, interesting. I wouldn't think about this, but it makes a lot of sense. So how the purpose of learning impacts what you want to learn first about, for example.
Absolutely.
Makes a lot of sense. And let's talk about the industry for a while as well. So you mentioned in the beginning that when the market shifts, we all need to bet on something. We all need to we need to bet on the future, how the future will impact us. If you look at 2023, what are your bets? What you at Babbel are betting on in terms of how the world will play out? I know it's the most difficult question to ask, but I think it's a question we also all are asking us all the time.
And I'm laughing because I think 2020, 21, 2023, I think the world has gone, at least it feels like that to me. It's like much more unstable. There is much more different influences. The war in Ukraine, for example, is one of those that I think we didn't have on the radar, and that was like super hard to predict, at least like with a year's time frame. So I think being flexible and being able to adapt to the situation at hand is probably like a skill set or a capability that will become much more important. But as you said, the bigger bets, like some of the big themes, obviously need bigger investment, so it's harder to tackle those in a very ad hoc fashion. I think there is one theme that everyone is talking about, and I think that's really a big moment in time. I think with ChatGPT showing the progress that generative models can actually have on the world, and the type of things to expect over there is obviously a real big opportunity. I think for many companies and for many industries. And I think the same is true for language learning and Babbel very specifically, because the amount of personalization you can drive with that approach, I think is unmatched. You could only do that with humans before, to really adapt something very specific to you. I think we're going to see a lot of really helpful products coming up in that area that really can accelerate your personal learning. So I'm super excited about that.
So if we pause here for a while, if you think about the language learning landscape, which products or types of services do you think that AI can boost or allow in the coming years? If you were thinking about this.
Yeah, I think one of the elements that we're going to see weaved into lots of products as well that is super helpful is very specific feedback. So it can take the form of like a pronunciation feedback, kind of like, hey Thomas, your TH really sucks. Kind of like, here's the thing that you should be doing. Really taking in like your personal performance and your strengths, your weaknesses, etc. So I think that's one of the areas in the way we give feedback and the depth of the feedback and how to actually understand where you're struggling and then providing really tailored content to your specific needs. Not just because you're from that country, but because of you and what you did. I think that's one of the pieces.
And I think the enabler is that until right now, or until we can apply the technology, this was just not economical. I mean, you would need to have a person listening to everything you say. It wouldn't make sense. But if you can automate it, I fully agree. This can be a game changer in the way we learn, because right now we are missing this feedback. So we are talking to the Babbel app, just maybe our friend next to us hear us, and not sure if he can or she can correct us, but this can be a game changer, definitely. One more question from the audience. So from Mary, what's your take on the current massive layoffs in the tech world? Were companies not paying enough attention to sustainability, or you see a different reason for them?
So that's always as well super hard to really assess from the outside in. I think every company might have a totally different situation. So that's the disclaimer I'll give, that I'm not the expert in that side. I think we've seen a lot of companies really build up a lot of talent during COVID, during the lockdowns, when tech, online, everything was booming. So I think there was some element of like a gold rush. We need to like hire more. We need to build bigger teams. We need to take on these bigger bets. And I think that's part of probably that. Looking back, yes, it's easy to say that probably wasn't sustainable in that regards. I think when you're in that, it's always quite hard to figure out how much of that shift is going to be permanent, how much of that is going to go away. So this is not me blaming anyone in that regards. So I think that's one of the pieces that I think that might not be sustainable. And then I think as much as the hype was going on and kind of like you felt the company next door would be either raising more money, building bigger teams, building bigger things, I think there is some herd mentality in here right now as well, is in terms of like, oh yeah, Google laid off that many people. Like how many people do we need to lay off as Amazon or as Facebook? I think like there is some downward spiral and like psychology elements going on as well. That is probably not sustainable neither. So I think we see the effects on both sides.
Right. Thank you very much for this as well. And maybe at the end, a few questions that just pop up in my mind. I bet with a product like yours, you have some wonderful stories of a user that life was changed completely with, or you might have. I actually wonder, do you get those stories from your users? So they tell you that their life changed because of Babbel. And if you could share one or two, it would be great.
Yeah. So absolutely, and I think that's always a very humble experience to actually see, because most of the times as you build out that product, and especially a digital product in product and tech, you don't like talk to users often enough. Yes, we're doing research, but most of the time you're still thinking of the mechanics of pushing something out. And so these stories are usually super humbling as well, and because then you see like the human side of that, kind of like the way your product actually affects many people. And really one of the best ways is to look at individual stories as well, because they're much more relatable. So I gave the example of I think Tom was the name from the US, who is like one of the earlier learners. So he learns with Babbel quite a long time. And the story there is that his family really moved to the States before World War II, so like a long time. So you had like these family across a couple of continents, right? And so with distance, then they usually grow people growing apart from each other. And Tom then really came to Babbel because he wanted to connect back to like that other estranged part in Italy, and he learned Italian, and kind of like the effort he put in to be able to speak to his family in Europe really made quite a difference in his life, to be able to connect these different streams of families back together. And I think that's one of the elements where it's like, wow, crazy. It's like what you can do with just an app, right? So it takes like a quite bigger meaning. And then there's obviously stories around people, for example, from Brazil, where people like really wanted to study at a specific university in Brazil, but because of the school system not providing enough English training, then using an app like Babbel really gave him the confidence and the skills to actually go to university. And this is a life-changing moment in that regards. And I think like these moments when people really can use language, learn something with Babbel, and really make a shift that can be economic, but that can be emotional as well, like for Tom. I think that's the moments when it's really humble to see the type of impact we can have.
All right. I think there's no better way to end the episode than with those kind of stories where your product impacted people. Thank you, Thomas, a lot for the conversation. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and see you at the next episode.
Thanks very much. Wishing you a great day.
Thank you.